there, I am Beth Stallwood, your host on the WorkJoy Jam podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Ruth Richards. Now, Ruth has spent many years working in communications, and she's now a consultant who helps organisations and their people work together really, really well. And through our chats, we talk about this subject of how important our relationships are at work to our levels of work joy. How when they're great, they can be bringers of joy. How when they're terrible, they can be real bringers of work gloom. Yeah, it's something that we're not really trained for. I've never seen a job description that doesn't involve wanting great teamwork. Yet, how do we actually build that? What are the skills we need and how do we make that happen? I really enjoyed this conversation, thinking about that depth of relationship and how do we do more of it better, communicate better, and work together better. And I really hope you enjoy this episode. Well, welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I am very pleased today to be joined by the wonderful Ruth Richards. And rather than me introduce Ruth, as usual, I'm going to hand over, Ruth. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are and what you do.
So I help people work together more effectively. So I do that by doing some consultancy, some training, some coaching, facilitation. I look at the culture in an organisation. I look at communication within teams and between individuals. And I look at the skills that people need to collaborate. And very interestingly, in recent years, we've been doing all of that through the lens of hybrid working, which is fascinating. I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Yeah, a whole big subject to talk about.
Yeah.
a different way of doing working life, I think, in the hybrid world. And so interesting, isn't it? Like collaboration, getting people working well together, thinking about culture. And I'm excited to dive into some of those areas because they are areas where we find a lot of people get a lot of joy from, but also can be real areas where things get tricky and sticky and icky and we don't know always how to handle those things. So we're going to go into that. Before we do, could you tell us your career story and how it is you got to doing this thing that you do now? Because we're always fascinated about like the route that people take to where they've got to so far.
Yeah, of course. So my background is that for about 16, 17 years, I worked in marketing and communications roles in the charity sector. So obviously wonderful work with a lot of purpose, but also a lot of change, a lot of challenges, a lot of different stakeholders and things to think about. So that was brilliant and I loved it. I was lucky enough to sort of get into quite senior roles. I had quite big teams, really enjoyed kind of thinking about the team dynamics and how people were working together. So that was great. But then a few years back, sort of coinciding with my second maternity leave, COVID came, and it just felt like this was the time really to think a bit differently, do something different. So as I said, I've always been fascinated by how people communicate with each other, how people interact with each other, how teams work when people are trying to come to an agreement about something. So I trained as a coach and as a facilitator and have just focused on that really. And as I said, it's been a very interesting time to do that.
Yeah. And probably an interesting time to be on maternity leave with babies and things during COVID.
Do you know what? I think I would say it was lucky in a way that I feel very lucky that I didn't have to try and work while I was at home with children, because having spoken to people who did that, it broke a lot of people, I think. And I would say, I'm a massive fan of people working from home and hybrid working. I think it's brilliant. It allows people to, live better lives, really. Being able to work from home has changed my life and it's for the good of everyone I live with as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel I was quite lucky though that I didn't have to try and do that while homeschooling
or homeschooling
after a baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just thinking the thought of it is bringing me out. Oh
no. So really fascinating, and I'm really interested in this kind of transition from marketing and comms, which in my mind is communicating to people outside the organization, to this looking at how people work together inside an organization. When did that fascination start about the inside the organisation stuff?
I think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I do see such a through line between what I used to do and what I do now. And I think as a communicator, as a marketeer, I was always interested in changing what people thought. And obviously, because I worked in the charity sector, a big part of what we were trying to do was to raise awareness and change how people thought about particular issues. Um, and marketing and comms is an interesting department often in a lot of organizations, because you're kind of right at the heart of everything. You kind of have to work with everyone. You're a little bit of a service team, so you're trying to do what people want you to do, but you also have a strategic function where you're trying to say to people, actually, I don't want to do it like that, or we need to do this differently to fit with what our audiences want. So being that bridge between the audiences and the internal. Um, so actually, as I got more senior, so much of my role was about that internal influencing and persuading and recognizing how much of my success was, my team's success, not just mine, was built on that ability to kind of manage all those different things internally.
Yeah.
So I just found it really interesting. And I think as I've got older as well, I think there's something about, recognizing that making a difference doesn't have to be on this massive scale all the time. Making a difference can be smaller scale. And I think you touched on it just then, like the difference that it makes for people when teams work well. I think there's like a stat that something like workplace stress is related to, like, 92% of people say their workplace stress is related to team dynamics. So if you could just get
Yeah.
that stuff right, the number of happier people you would have. So yes, I think but I've always been interested in people and how people think and how you can communicate with people to connect with them.
Yeah. So many things to talk about. One of the things I just wanted to recognise here is this idea that you obviously did work with purpose, like the charity sector. The purpose is inbuilt into the organisation, right? We don't have to search for it. We don't have to seek it out. There's many big corporate organisations spending lots of money trying to work out a purpose. But when you work in the charity sector, the purpose is there. It's already there. But actually, this idea that we can all have smaller purposes and it doesn't have to be these big things. And I like to think of those micro purposes, the little things that inspire us, that get us excited about our work, can be there and can be really, really important and make a massive difference to everybody.
I love that, micro purposes. I think that's so true. And I think recognizing that we can all change someone's day or change how what someone feels about turning up to work,
Yeah.
is huge.
So tell me a little bit more about the team dynamics, getting people working together, getting collaboration happening. Obviously, that stat is amazing, but I'm not surprised because there are so many stats out there. You leave people in the business, not the business.
Yeah.
You leave your manager. The relationships you have make or break your day when you're in a working environment. And I think, especially now, even with all the hybrid stuff and working from home, etc., the ability to work with other people is such a core skill for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, if I reflect on my personal education, no one's ever taught me how to do that. Not once.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think there's a coaching exercise I sometimes do with people where we look back on, like, highlights of their working life to kind of pull out what gets them going. And so often they'll be talking about projects or things they've worked on, and it's never like the outcome that they reflect on. It's always, oh, that was such a good time because it felt like everyone was working together. So yes, it has the negative impacts if things don't work well, but I think most of us, when we look back on our highlights of our career, it's often related to, like, when things felt really good and everyone was working together, and that shared purpose piece that you talked about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and that it is a skill. I think one thing that frustrates me about the conversations about hybrid is that there's a lot of focus on tools all the time, like, what's the right tool to make hybrid work? And it's absolutely skills that people need to make this stuff work well. It's communication skills, it's influencing skills, it's, how to build rapport and build trust with people. Those are all skills that can be learned. But I do think there's something, if I think about, I don't know for you, Beth, but like when I learned that stuff early in my career, I kind of learned it by osmosis, by watching people, by seeing people do it, by looking at the people in the office who seem to have a lot of sway and seeing what they did. So I think there's a danger that we're not teaching people by osmosis anymore. So we've got to be really explicit and say, you need to come and learn these skills.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting, isn't it? I think about people now who are starting work, never really going into an office, never having that situation. And I think this is one of the reasons why hybrid is hard. I think it's brilliant. I think it has so much potential. I'm definitely waving the flag for working from home, hybrid working in a more flexible way for everybody, I think is better. But it is hard, I think, for people to start working that way. People who've never had it any other way. People who started and their first day is on Zoom calls. And for me, it just feels really strange, I have to say. I think I'd find that really, really hard. And those skills, we don't think of the skills. You're right. And with so many things around people, everyone's like, well, what's the right technology and what's the right platform and what are the right tools? And I'm like, how about we start with how we have these conversations and what our behaviors are and how do we make those things work for us? And I'd be really interested to know if you could give us some things around. People often think that certain people can build rapport, certain people are good at it, and that it's not a skill, that it's more of a kind of innate talent. And I don't believe that's true. So I'd love to know from you, how do you help people understand or work out how they can do some of those things? Have you got some tips for us?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because I think a lot of people, I think maybe it comes more naturally to some people than others, but it's absolutely something that we can all do. I often talk to people about, to build rapport and build trust, the main thing is to not be just interested in yourself. I think it comes from a genuine interest in other people and what other people are doing. And from that flows all the rapport building skills that we might know about, which is sort of listening, engaging, reflecting back to people what they've said. All of those things are easy if you are genuinely interested in what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I sometimes say to people, so strategically, it's useful to be interested in what people are saying. If you are a head of department, it's very useful to know and understand what your peers are doing. For me, that's the main thing, is that you have to be focused on the bigger picture. You have to be focused on what are we all trying to do together?
Yeah.
What is our purpose?
And actually, if we're interested in what other people are doing and where we're going, we'll find out all those connection points, won't we? We'll find out where we're interested in the same things, or where we've got some similarity in our lives beyond work, or, asking questions, finding out more, being interested. And I love the way they use the word genuinely there, because I also have been in that world where people pretend to be interested and don't listen to actually a word you say.
Yeah, I think we've all worked with those people as well. But we know, don't we? I think as human beings, we know. So one of the things I talk about when I do talks is, so we know that, like, Homo sapiens, how did we take over the world? Why are we the most successful species? And it's not because we're stronger or faster than anyone else, or probably even because we're any smarter than a lot of other species, even the other human species. We are really good at collaborating, and we're really good at forming bonds, and we're really good at working as a group and finding a shared understanding. And so all of that stuff is kind of innate in all of us. I think when we meet someone who goes against that, it really jars. But when someone is genuinely interested in working well with us, we feel it and it lifts you, and you just think, yes, this is going to be fun.
It's a really good point you put there about fun. And obviously, I'm all about work joy. We want people to have more joy at work, and fun is one of the ways that you can have joy. Now, some people are hugely against anything that I would call organized fun, but actually the fun that comes from being with people and the fun that comes from working on stuff together. And I sometimes think we associate fun with everything being good. And I'd love to just bust a myth there, is that some of the best times I've had at work have been when the crisis has happened. I'm going to swear now, so pause if you don't like it. When the shit hits the fan and people gather together because there is this single purpose, we've got to solve a problem, we've got to fix an issue, we've got to tidy up something that we broke, whatever it is those times can be really hard and really fun. it doesn't have to be fun and good all the time. It could be fun and difficult. It could be fun and interesting. It could be fun and frustrating. But if we're looking for the one side of it, it's not going to work. It's the within what we do, finding the ways of making it better by working together.
Yeah, I think that's so true, isn't it? There's that energy that comes from, I mean, I'm like you, I always used to quite like a crisis because you had that real, like that purpose and everyone came together and it felt, there was energy to it. And I think, yeah, again, if you look at the types of workforces that tend to use humour and black humour the most, NHS, organisations that tend to have a lot of black humour going around because it's a way of bonding and lightening and bringing some joy into it.
And the whole kind of like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry situation. Yeah. And being able to do that together is a really important thing. So tell us a bit more about collaboration. So we talked about kind of like working, building rapport, collaborating. I would say out of 100 people I talked to in the last year, 90 of them are probably having challenges with getting collaboration working properly. Mm-hmm. And I think, tell me if you think I'm wrong here. I'm going to give an opinion here. I have no evidence to support this. It's just an opinion. I think hybrid is being used as an excuse to say that collaboration isn't good. And I think collaboration was bad before hybrid existed.
I think you are probably right. I think, again, one of the things I talk to people about is that this stuff is not, and it kind of frustrates me. I don't know. You hear people blaming the senior leadership or blaming the leadership team of, oh, the culture's rubbish, we don't work with other teams. And I think what hybrid does is it means that we really have to take responsibility ourselves for how we work. You've not got your boss sitting next to you at the next desk along now, keeping an eye on you. So if you want to work in a collaborative way, you've got to take responsibility for that and work out how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I do think hybrid has made it less instinctive for people or harder to track, or certainly easier for people who might want to opt out of it. But you're right, it's always been something that has challenged.
Yeah. I think it's challenges workplace, and I am a big believer in personal responsibility for changing the stuff that isn't working for you. And if anyone says to me, oh, the culture's rubbish, I'm like, well, what are you doing to influence the culture? Because the culture isn't set by one person, it's set by everybody in the organization. So if you want more collaboration, you're going to have to do some stuff to be more collaborative.
Yeah.
Especially if you are in a leadership role, you do have a responsibility there, but you're not the only person who can make that happen. And we can't look to our leaders and expect them to be brilliant at absolutely everything, because they are, after all, human beings. And I say it in my book, but organizations don't actually exist. They're a figment of our imagination. They're not a person. They don't make decisions. It's the people within it that make things happen. So I think, yeah, you're right. The hybrid factor, one of the things I think it removes is the accidental conversation.
Yeah.
Like the corridor conversation, what the Americans call it, the water cooler conversation, I'm just bumping into you and I remembered I need to say something to you. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen so often when you're trying to just Zoom people, because there'll be formal meetings and structure and process. And I think that's the missing bit. And I've always wondered, how do we build more of that non-formal, more accidental conversation into the hybrid world? And I'd love to know if you've got any advice on that.
I think you're right, but yeah, where I always remember there was a queue for the microwave at lunch. That was only two people, but that doesn't sound as nice as the water cooler moment, does it?
The microwave moment.
The microwave moment. I think you're right. It is that kind of, and it's also the people that you maybe don't work with, but you sort of see them every day and you say hello. So when you need to go to talk to them about something, they sort of know you a bit already. I've seen different organisations do different things. So some will do kind of an online you'll randomly be half an hour a week, randomly matched with someone to go and have a coffee with online. One organisation I work with has sort of said, if you're in the office, there's this kind of 3:00 tea break. So everyone is encouraged to come along to the sort of kitchen cafe area and stop for half an hour and chat. I think there is definitely something that a lot of organisations are missing about how they use that in-office time to let people do that and make people do that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard. I think that is the hardest thing. I think there's also, as a follow-on from that accidental conversation, the two things that are related that are difficult hybrid, I think, are the kind of instantaneous feedback that doesn't feel like a big deal, but it's just looking over someone's shoulder and going, oh, can you tweet that? Or actually in that meeting you did really well. Or, you know, and I think the other thing that we need to really think about how we do is that kind of support piece. Like, I remember, you know, if someone was having a tough time in my team, as a manager, I could normally see it because I was in the office with them and I could take them into a room and go, are you okay? Or you'd do that for your peers maybe if they saw it. And I think those kind of three serendipity kind of conversations are the things that we miss in hybrid.
Yeah, and it's really hard actually, especially with cameras on, cameras off, what's going on, to know if someone's not saying there's something up. It's really hard to notice, I think, in the hybrid world that there's something going on. And that calls for kind of more regular conversations, check-ins, less surface level conversations, better mental health support, all of that stuff is required there. And I'm a big believer in the power of feedback. And I think you're right, it's not so easy to do that stuff because also everything's on like shared documents, isn't it? And people are writing comments, and the minute you go from writing to speaking to somebody, it always sounds more formal and more like you're in trouble than it does if you're just having a chat. So that's a really big challenge for managers, especially on how to do some of those things where you can't necessarily notice, so but raising your awareness of where people are at, what they're doing, and finding ways to have those conversations. It's also making me really think about some older fashioned work practices that maybe we need to reinvigorate. So when I think about, if you think about kind of manufacturing plants, etc., or even some other industries, used to always kind of have the whistle goes, lunch break happens, and everyone goes to lunch together, right? Everyone started together, everyone went to lunch together, everyone had their tea break together. Even things like back in the day, this was before my time, and I really am sad I didn't get one. You know, the tea ladies coming around with the little trolley and kind of talking to you and communicating and things. And I wonder if the digital world, not just the hybrid world, we've gone way past, you know, that now, but like the digital world and people sitting at desks, at computers, etc., and that no longer being necessary because they turned them, the whole point of manufacturing is you turn the machine off for that hour and everyone goes to lunch and then the machines go back on, right? So the manufacturer had a purpose that was beyond that. But the kind of accidental result of that was probably better teamwork because everyone's having conversations and doing stuff that isn't work together.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because we don't, even companies that sort of say, oh, don't book meetings over lunch, even the ones that manage to do that, which so many don't, people are still, they're going to sit in their own houses having lunch or go off. And I just things like the Friday night down the pub. I don't, well, not to make assumptions, but when I was in my 20s, going to the pub on a Friday after work for a drink or two was a huge part of how you got to know people. And I'm not saying it should be like that. That's not necessarily great for everyone. That's not a great way to encourage diversity. But there's some of those rituals we've kind of lost something. There was a piece of research that said, like way back in the 70s, called the Allen curve, where they sort of looked at how often you communicated with people based on how closely you sat with them.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen that one? And there's that kind of magic point about 8 meters where people suddenly would be chatting to each other all the time. And that's interesting because how does that apply in, I think, they say, it was a stat that like people who work from home spend 48% less time like talking to people than they would if they were in the office. So I like that. So rituals that can get that back might be the way to go.
I like the ritual thing is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because you can build it in. You can build a ritual into your culture. You can talk about it. You can do something with it. It comes with structure and purpose and all the kind of things that make people want to do stuff. And by the way, anyone listening, I am not suggesting that everyone should have a forced lunch break where they all have to sit together because quite frankly, that would be awful too. But there's something around, and I don't think that's necessarily the right ritual. It's not necessarily the right thing for the world we live in now. But the thing I wrote down while you were talking is kind of like the work that happens in the sidelines. It doesn't happen in the main conversational area. It doesn't happen necessarily in the meetings or the Zoom calls or the whatever it is. That's, for me, the thing I think you lose with working from home and some of the tech related stuff that we do.
I think you're right. I think there's such a focus on productivity, and a lot of the conversations about people working from home are focused on productivity and kind of output. And I think, sometimes people feel that's what they're being judged on as well. And all this stuff, this relationship building, this kind of chatting without an agenda, this kind of collaborating, exploring, it's time consuming. So there also kind of needs to be, whether it's a ritual or just permission, I guess, that this stuff is your work and it does matter.
Yeah.
I remember, I used to have, with my opposite numbers in other departments, like once a month we'd go and have a coffee together, which, when you've got a really busy day and, 2 reports to write and your KPIs to do for a board meeting can feel like because it was in the diary, we went and did it. And I always think I used to get so much benefit from that hour. It wasn't just a nice social thing. It was, when there were later issues, when things came up, they were always resolved so much more quickly because we had built a relationship and we had a forum where we could bring that stuff if there were issues between the teams or with the work. So I think there's something about that mental shift of like, this is part of your job and this is worth doing and it's worth spending time on.
It's so funny because I literally wrote on LinkedIn this morning about so many people have been saying, I've been in so many meetings, I haven't had any time to do my work. And I was like, but your work is meeting is part of your work.
Meetings are the more senior you are, the more meetings are your work,
Yeah. And it's actually, if we need to reframe that, because if you don't see that as your work, then you're probably not as engaged with them. You're probably not as interested. You're probably not as focused on them. You're probably trying to do all the other stuff, but not really engaged in the meeting. Then there's a bigger question of, should you even be in the meeting or should it even be a meeting? There's a whole thing around that side of stuff. But I also think as humans, we have a really weird relationship with time when it comes to work. So we will do anything to save time today to make us more productive right now in this moment, like work through lunch, proven not helpful, like work in the evenings, proven not good for our mental health or long-term well-being, which is not good for work. Like say, oh, I'm going to cancel all the stuff that brings me any joy. I'm just going to do the stuff that is productive. Not good for us, not good for business. Like hang on a minute, that's just a conversation with somebody, so I won't bother with that. And then we don't have a relationship in 3 months in the future when whatever the big decision is relies on our relationship. We haven't invested the time in the right place.
Yeah.
So there's something about where we see the investment and doing more upfront for that to make everything else easier in the future, but our brains can't really handle it. Well, I know lots of people can't.
But, you and I were talking about crises, and I think crises were fun because I was working with a group of people who I knew and trusted, and we had a lot of shortcuts in terms of how we could talk about things. And yeah, those crises were much easier to manage and over a lot quicker because of all the time and effort that had gone into building the relationships beforehand.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's also an interesting one. And I think I'm sitting here considering my time in offices and kind of my early career and how you learn stuff, and that, you called it like learning by osmosis, which I think is really great, but also learning through the people that you work with and having those really deep supportive relationships that you build when you sit next to somebody, when you do work together, when you have the same or similar job as somebody else, and maybe you're at a similar point in your career or maybe not. And how I'm sitting here thinking how different it would be to not be doing that all the time. The people actually, I think if you were to add it up, you spend more waking hours with the people you work with when you're in an office than you ever did with anyone you chose to spend time with. And this morning I've got back from a coffee, which was with a friend, which was a friend I met at work 20 something years ago. And we sat next to each other and we've been like best buds ever since. And that's a really interesting thing is, does that happen anymore? I'd be really interested to know. Do people get their work BFFs anymore?
See, I'm fascinated by this because I just think I have made real, genuine friendships at work. They have been, often the thing that has made a job as enjoyable as it has been for me. They've shaped who I am and how I work. And just it's interesting. And you learn so much from those people. And I think where you've got people who worked together before the pandemic, then it carries on, and they're the ones that maybe sort of WhatsApping each other on the side in meetings or whatever. So I think, relationships that were pre-existing survive. But I do wonder, if you're coming into the workforce now and you don't have that kind of, you have to sort of really make an effort to build a relationship like that, don't you? And we didn't really have to make an effort, did we? It just
I didn't even try. There was no trying involved. I didn't have to schedule a meeting or consider trying to build a relationship. It just happened.
Whereas now you probably almost have to go to someone and go, will you be my friend?
Yeah. Which is the worst way to get a new friend.
I mean,
the desperation of
it doesn't work in grown up, no.
Hi Ruth, will you be my best friend at work? Probably not. It sounds a bit weird.
Of course I will. That's fine.
But I think it's Gallup, isn't it? The research from Gallup always asks the question, do you have a best friend at work? And how the impact of having somebody who's got your back, who's like a comrade in arms, who's there with you throughout it. I mean, if I think about all my different jobs, I have people now, and I haven't worked in an organisation as an employee for a number of years now, but I have people from all of my different jobs who I would count as the best friends I had at work. Some are bosses, some were, people who reported into me, some are people who, and afterwards you still have that friendship because the friendship outlasts the job.
Yeah.
But the friendship within the job made all of those things possible and exciting and interesting and fun along the way. Mm-hmm. I'm totally going to put this out there, by the way, anyone listening on as a social question. I want to know, do people still have best friends at work?
Because it makes sense if you think about it. You're probably going to end up working in similar roles to people you have stuff in common with. They're not random people. If you've chosen to go and do similar roles in similar types of organisations, then you're going to have a lot in common. I mean, people used to marry people they work with, didn't they? You used to have office romances. I'm sure you don't get office romances anymore.
I think they're probably not couth anymore, are they?
Yeah. I think they were dying off once internet dating started. But, it makes perfect sense, really, when you think about it, that interestingly, a lot of my friends from university do the same sort of roles as well, because I think if you're, it makes perfect sense that you'd be friendly with people.
If you're interested in a specific subject and you make that subject your career and you're interested in a particular type of organisation, like you were interested in purpose-led charity organisations, so you then gather around people who have similar interest, backgrounds, experience to you, and then it's very easy to be friends with people who have those things.
Yeah, so it makes perfect sense. So I think it would be really sad and I would be really interested in if you put that out there, the responses you get, because I think it would be a sad thing to lose those kind of friendships that come from work. Because
I agree. I think it could be a really sad thing. And also, I don't think it's just an individual benefit that you get from people having those deep relationships at work. I think so if we think about, is this just a nice to have? I don't think so. I think it's a win-win for the organisation. And I do that, now I'm going completely down a rabbit hole for a moment, and then I'll drag myself back out. Is we have a big challenge about mental health at work, a big challenge. And now I'm doing a related thing is one of our big challenges about mental health at work, that people don't have that depth of relationship and friendship at work anymore. Is that a contributing factor?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it was the Mental Health Foundation did a survey a few years back that says 1 in 5 people said they felt lonely at work. But I think that 18 to 24-year-olds were twice as likely to feel lonely. So there was definitely something there. So when I was in the charity sector, I worked for mental health charities. And, I was at Mind when we started doing a lot of the work around workforce well-being and looking at what made people happy at work, which is obviously all you do. But if you look at the resilience, I think the Roffey Park resilience wheel looks at the things that build our resilience, and a big one of those is about connections and networks and feeling like you've got people around you and different people who can support you with different things. So I think even if you've got the most wonderful partner at home, you've got family, you've got friends, I think there's still a need for feeling like someone at work is cares about you.
Yeah. And not just as someone who produces something, as somebody
Yeah.
who is a human being.
Yeah. You want to feel like if you had a moment in the office that you needed to have a little cry, that you had someone that you could go to.
Yeah.
I think it matters to people.
Because real life stuff that happens doesn't just happen outside of work. It happens, you're still a human being when you go into work. So somebody, and God, it makes me really sad hearing that 18 to 24-year-olds are twice as likely to feel lonely at work, because that's such in your formative years of work and understanding how to do stuff and knowing where to go. I feel really sad about that. Really sad about it.
It kind of breaks my heart because I just think that was probably the time when I felt least lonely at work.
Yeah.
Because I was a fairly junior role, didn't have a lot of responsibility. That was the time that I was really enjoying making connections with people and the office chat. And, it should be lonelier at the top, surely.
Yeah, maybe it's not the same anymore, and I think that all the things we've talked about today is that is a sad and shocking stat, and in fact, even just 1 in 5 people feeling lonely at work is a really hard one to swallow, and I think there's some stuff that we can do. So I'm always big on what's the individual responsibility here, like reaching out to people, making connections with people, talking to people, and if you're not getting in your organization, your wider network is probably somewhere where you can get more of that. And I'm always a big fan of go out and meet people who are in the same industry as you, go and find and have some conversations with people. One of my like work related best friends, I suppose, we've never worked together. We met in a lift on going to a conference where we were both running late, and we've been friends ever since. There are the act of going and connecting with people is usually a helpful thing. Now, everyone does that differently. I'm an extroverted person. I'm quite happy to go and talk to people. Some people do that in a different way. But finding your way of having a community around you, of having a squad of people who can support you, who can enable you, whether that's in your workplace or beyond, is going to be a good thing for you and your career and for the organisation.
I think that's, yes, definitely. And also, you said before, it can be awkward to say, you feel like it's awkward to say to someone, please be my friend. But I think, again, that point of like everyone wants this. We're humans are sort of social animals. Some of us are more extroverted than others, but we all need and want connection, and we all need and want connection in all areas of our life. So yeah, other people you work with are probably if you're craving it and it's not there in your culture, then other people are probably craving it too. So even just saying to someone, oh, do you know what, do you want to jump on a online call and have a coffee together first thing in the morning? Just
no
get
one's
to
know
say
each
no.
other. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's just, you want to have a coffee. I also think asking people about like what motivates them or finding out, more about their lives is always going to be a good thing. And you don't have to start with, will you be my new best friend? You start with, do you fancy a coffee? You start with, can we chat about this? Can you start with, oh, I really admired this thing that you did in that meeting. Tell me more about how you do that. And then you get the more learning side of things into the world as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right. We've been talking for quite a long time. I'm going to have to move us on to our quick fire questions. Are you ready, Ruth?
No, got the pressure.
They're not that hard. I'm sure you'll be fine. Okay. First question for you is, what book are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading, I'll tell you the truth, I was reading The Running Grave last week and it was so tense that I kind of had to, now I've finished it, I needed something different. So I'm reading, I think it's called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. It's really interesting. It's about, the importance of kind of recognizing and holding moments in the life. So, whether that's your first day at work, letting go of something. So I'm only about a third of the way in, but it's really interesting thinking about
great.
moments.
I've read a different book by them.
Yeah,
Switch.
Yes. There's a kind of, I've read a couple of those because they're kind of comms classics.
Yeah.
But this one's slightly different and really interesting. Very riveting too.
It sounds great. Love the idea of that one. For you personally, the second question, what is always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
I think people, I just enjoy, I'm a real EN on the Myers-Briggs. So to be with one or two other people bouncing ideas around, creating stuff is what always brings me loads of work joy. And now that I work on my own, like having to make the effort to go out and find that, but I do, because it's really worth it.
Yeah. And even there, there's even a purpose there, because creating stuff together is the purpose, right? It's not just for the sake of it. There's some kind of micro purpose included in it. What is the best bit of advice that you have had from someone else that you always find yourself coming back to?
I remember the first bit of advice I got at work from my first manager, who was a brilliant man, very old-fashioned, and said, most important person you can make friends with at an organisation is the CEO's PA. Make sure they're your friend and you'll go far. I was like, okay. So that was interesting. But on a serious note, I think, and a couple of friends have said this to me, because I need reminding of it quite often, enough is enough sometimes. It's good enough is good enough. And we just spoke earlier about, it's wonderful to have a purpose and be trying to change the world, but changing your world is enough. So that kind of sense of good enough is good enough. As long as you're making a difference in your little bit of the world, you don't have to be.
Yeah, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to be everything to everybody. Yeah. You don't have to be perfect. Yeah, it's always a good.
Yes, good enough is good enough.
I don't necessarily disagree with the old boss's advice about the CEO's PA. I think, people say, but I wouldn't necessarily limit it to PAs. People make friends with people who are well connected in the organisation.
I think that's what he was getting at. And I think, to be fair, he was my first proper manager, my first proper job. And he really said to me, the most important thing you can do is make relationships. He used to sort of walk around the building every day and stop to chat to people. And I just think, actually, there was a lot to be said for that.
Yeah,
so it was good advice.
There is a theory of management, isn't there, called theory of management by walking around, wandering around and seeing what's going on. It kind of works.
I've said for it, I think. How do you recreate that in hybrid?
I don't know. Like dropping into everyone's Zoom meetings. It would be weird, wouldn't it? Hi! That I'm going to have to think on that one. What is one little thing you would recommend that our audience did today, tomorrow, the next day? So tiny things that would help them in a sense of kind of connecting, collaborating, etc.
I think when you go into a meeting, an online meeting, just sort of taking the time to go, hi, how are you? Like, we did before we started recording. How's your week going? How's your weekend? Got anything nice coming up? I think those little couple of minutes of chit chat are massively overlooked. So they're a really easy way to just start building in. And if you're running a meeting with a few people, just getting everyone to check in and say how they're feeling today will get everyone much more likely to contribute as the meeting goes on.
So do the human bit first.
The human bit first, yeah.
Not just like, let's get down to business.
Yeah. And again, I think, sometimes when you were sitting in a room waiting for everyone to kind of file in, it was sort of, you did that because you had to fill the time. Whereas, sometimes you go into a Zoom meeting, it's like, right, here's the agenda, let's go.
Yeah. Human first is usually a good way to go, isn't it?
As a general rule, I think.
As a general rule, I'm not sure there's many situations where that wouldn't work.
No.
Amazing. Right, final question from me. Where can people find out more about you and your work and what you do?
I'm on LinkedIn, so please send me a connection request, anyone. I'm there just as Ruth Richards, and I also have a website, which is ruthkrichards.co.uk, where I've got more information, and you can sign up for my newsletter, where I share regular kind of tips and tools in this area.
Fantastic. And what we will do is we'll put those in the show notes as well, so people can click straight on through. Ruth, it's been great talking to you today. I think this question of collaboration, how we do it in hybrid, is an ongoing challenge for all of us. And it's great to hear some thinking around it and how we build in those more human connections, the more moments of like we would for the accidental stuff, but doing it online as well as doing it in person. And the question of rituals is going to sit with me, I think, for a little while. of what are the rituals that would work in the new world to help us do some of those things. So thank you so much for being on the WorkJoy Jam today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
A huge thank you to Ruth for joining me on today's WorkJoy Jam podcast. Such interesting things to consider. I think one thing that's really in my mind after today is, in this hybrid world that we're living in, where teams aren't always working together in person, even if they're working together online, how do we build those really, really strong relationships? How do we get those, what we were calling work BFFs, the best friends at work, when the relationship starts differently or continues differently, or has never been that way for some people in organisations right now? And I think that's one that's going to stick in my mind for quite some time, because there is no obvious answer for that one. Maybe it's that we don't need them, but maybe we do. And if we do, how do we help build those relationships in a different way to perhaps how we built them when I was first starting out in the kind of corporate world 20 years ago? So I don't have an answer for you, but it's one that's definitely landed in my mind as something to keep pondering on. As always, I'd love you to have a think about what's one thought, one action, one small thing that you might do as a result of listening to this podcast today. Remember that you can keep in touch with us on all the socials. We're at Create WorkJoy. I'm Beth Stallwood on LinkedIn. Would love to hear more from you and get your feedback. And you can always drop me a line, hello@createworkjoy.com.